Hey everyone, and welcome back to Rocksfall, your home for the best game reviews, creator interviews, and actual play in the podcasting world. This week, I had the amazing distinction of being able to talk to one of my favorite writers in all of DM's Guild, Ashley Warren. She's a Reno native, just like myself, and it was an amazing time chatting with her. It was a wonderful conversation. We got really honest about some stuff, the pitfalls of writing, the amazing stuff that happens when your work starts to get noticed, and things that are in the future for the projects that we like and for what Ashley's up to. So I hope you enjoy the interview. But first, would you like to hear your tabletop product or RPG reviewed on this show? Reach out and get into contact. We're always looking for input from creators. Send any material you'd like us to consider reviewing to Rocksfall, care of Devon Trube, P.O. Box 61162, Reno, Nevada 89506. Again, that's Rocksfall, care of Devon Trube, P.O. Box 61162, Reno, Nevada 89506. Also, like what you hear, leave us a review wherever you found the show, and feel free to reach out on social media and through email. We can be found at rocksfallcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or you can reach out to us via email at rocksfallpod@gmail.com. Thank you so much, everyone. All the support for the show has been just astounding, and I'm loving every bit of it. I hope you enjoy the interview because it was a hell of a time for me anyway, and enjoy the show. Okay, so let's just jump in. Welcome to Rocksfall. We've got an amazing writer, D&D player, fellow Nevadan, Ashley Warren, with us today. And do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to do this in person because I feel like lately I've been doing a lot of podcasts with people around the world, but it's kind of nice to actually talk.
Fancy.
Yeah, in person. So my name is Ashley Warren, and I am a writer and a game designer, and I've been writing content for Dungeon Masters Guild since last December. So it's been a wild year.
It's only been a year.
Wow. Yeah, not even. I started I've been a writer essentially my whole life in some capacity. So I'm not new to writing, but I'm new to writing for D&D. So yeah, my first module was published in December. So, and since then I've just kind of hit the ground running. So I write for Dungeon Masters Guild. I recently became a Guild Adept, which is a program through Wizards of the Coast where they basically gather people in the community who they think have potential to work on some projects that coincide with their official releases. So yeah, I was so not expecting an opportunity like that to arise so soon after starting this journey. So yeah, I became a Guild Adept technically in June, but it was announced in July. So, and that's a fairly new program. I think that started last November, and it's a pretty small community of us, but we basically work on supplemental material that coincides with our major releases. So I'm working on some Eberron content, and yeah, which is really exciting and cool.
That's so cool.
And some other content in the works, but yeah, that's been an amazing experience so far. So yeah, that's basically what I do now is semi-professionally write and design games, which is amazing. And I do writing and editing in various capacities in other aspects of my life. But
well, that's astounding. So I'm super jealous of what you're doing. I do write quite a bit. I've developed my own several of my own modules and things like that over the last decade and a half of playing this game, and I would never think to release these out to the public just because I don't have confidence in my own writing. But how would you, if someone did want to do something like that, how would you get started?
Sure. So, I mean, I knew nothing about Dungeon Masters Guild specifically when I first published. I actually just did it because my DM was like, you should put your work on Dungeon Masters Guild, because I was just going to release it for free on my website, just as something fun to share with people. It was mostly just because I wanted to write something fun, and I thought I just put it out in the world.
Very cool.
So I would say for people who want to get started to join communities of fellow creators, there's a lot of great Facebook groups for people specifically writing for Dungeon Masters Guild and for D&D 5th edition. There's other community groups, lots of Discord channels, lots of people on Twitter who are writing for different rule sets, but specifically for D&D, I would say to just join some creator communities, go on Dungeon Masters Guild and just download some modules. There's a ton of free content on there that's really awesome. And it's great to just study and see what works and what's successful. And not so much what's successful in terms of like what makes a lot of money, because none of us are really doing this because we're making bank on it. But it's more just to see what types of games people enjoy to play. You can write one-shots that are totally original and set in your own place, or you can write modules that are set in the existing storylines. You just have a lot of freedom to produce whatever you'd like. So I would just say to just jump in and join some of the creator communities and read other people's work for sure.
Awesome. I mean, so are you able to just create an account and just upload stuff to DM's Guild, or? That's
pretty much all there is to it. So most content on DM's Guild is available as a downloadable PDF. Yeah. You can get kind of creative with how you do that. Some people make interactive PDFs. You can make printouts and handouts and fun content. There's also a print-on-demand program now that's still fairly new, and you have to be invited to that program, but I think you can reach out to the people who run the site to kind of vet your project for that.
Very cool.
So there's a few different ways that you can get content on there. So you can create an account on Dungeon Masters Guild, and then you basically just upload your content. You're given the chance to write a little summary, put some photos, and then it's out there. And what's nice is that you can always update your work too, which is good, because a lot of my work that I published really early on, it was before I feel like I've learned like just an incredible amount this year just through the people I've worked with. So I'm in the process of going back and updating some of my older modules. But what's nice about DM's Guild is that you can go back and upload new versions of your stories, which is really nice, especially as a new creator. It's not permanent work that you're putting out into the world. It can kind of always be evolving. So I think that a lot of people get hung up on making sure their work is perfect. Yeah. And I think it should be as clean as possible, but there are things that will probably change over time. So it's nice to be able to go in and release new updates. And people like to see that content is regularly being updated.
Well, I mean, as somebody who uses DM's Guild quite a bit, it's nice to see that there's still author interaction with the product. Mm-hmm. It's not just set there and then it sits there forever.
Right.
And I think that's something unique to the digital aspect of the modules and stuff like that, and the supplementary stuff that's coming out, as opposed to if you look at the old, like the Gygax single modules that came out back in the 70s and 80s. Once they were out, you couldn't edit it. But that's very cool. And so at this point, I counted, I believe, 8 projects you've worked on up on DM's Guild at the moment that are currently up.
That sounds about right. At one point I was releasing a module a month. So for December, January, February, and March, I released a one shot each of those months. Then I took a quote break, which didn't last very long, because then I released something in May. But during April is actually when I started getting commissions for work. Nice. So that's when I spent that whole month writing, but I wasn't releasing anything during that time. So then, I released something in May, and then I was included in an anthology called Dungeon Tales, which was kind of a way to revive the Dungeon magazine that used to publish one-shots in earlier editions. And that was a way that a lot of people got their start in game design, like Chris Perkins. So I was included in that anthology. So there's a couple of collaborations in there. And then I just released like a supplemental module a couple weeks ago, which was my first foray into non-adventure writing, which was kind of fun. And then I have another little adventure thing coming out this week at the time of our recording. Nice.
Very cool. So are you finding really good feedback from the community about your work? Because like for me, and I don't know if this is unique or not, but I found you online. I found some of your work and stuff. And then, I followed along, and then we actually met on another podcast's Facebook forum. And so I looked up some of your stuff. It was awesome. It was amazing. And then, we realized we were in the same city. We didn't actually meet until this year's RageCon though, which is our local gaming expo. Are you finding other folks like, I guess like me, who kind of just seek out your work and give you like, let you know that they're looking at it and enjoying it and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been a writer in some capacity for many years, and including creative writing, and I've never experienced a response to work the way I have with this community. And I know it's not just me; other creators in the community, I think, have similar experiences. But I was not expecting any sort of like response or feedback when I published my first module. Yeah. Like when I got like I was like live updating my D&D crew. Like after I posted, I was like, someone downloaded it, another person downloaded it. And then it just like took off, and I was like, whoa, okay. Like I guess I don't need to be updating you for every download. And then like someone paid for it. And I was like, oh my God, someone actually like paid for my work, because it was a pay what you want title. So I was not expecting the response from the community. It's just, they're so engaged and they're so eager for new content. And I mean, there's lots of great female creators in the community, but I do think that has helped a little bit to expose my work to a wider audience. I get emails regularly from other women and just non-binary folk in general, just that they're excited to see someone who's not just a male, writing content for DM's Guild.
Yeah.
And so that's been really great, just to know that other women like me are responding to my work, because I don't necessarily write work specifically for women, but I think I just have a point of view that might appeal to other people.
Definitely.
Like myself, who might gravitate towards similar stories. And I mean, I get great feedback and commentary from people of all genders and identities, but that's been really fulfilling to just know that people can go onto DM's Guild and see a woman's name in the credits, which is really cool. And I mean, there are lots of other great female creators. So I'm not trying to like toot my own horn. That's just been my experience, because I've had people email me like, wow, I was excited to see this collaboration and there's a woman involved. So I'm hoping we'll see more of that, where the collaborations are more female dominated and we just have better representation in general. So yes, the response has been crazy. I never really know what to expect when I put something out into the world. I write kind of selfishly, where I think of ideas that I think are cool. I'm starting to write a little bit differently with that now that I'm working on commissions and working on some official projects with Wizards of the Coast. Like I have to write for a wider audience besides just me. But I always start at that point with like, what kind of games do I like to play? What stories do I want to tell? And then I just kind of have to take a gamble on that. And for the most part, that's worked out really well. People have responded really well and given me lots of great feedback. And I mostly get positive reviews. Actually, this week I got my first 2 1-star reviews. Oh, no. Which I don't really care so much about what the ratings are. At some point when you're a writer, you have to just like understand that negative feedback is part of the game. But it's more disheartening because they didn't leave a review to accompany the rating. So it was just 1 star. And I'm like, I can't do anything with this. I can't improve my story. I can't see what your experience was. I mean, at some point it's like, are people just trolling me? You know, and lots of creators experience that. So it's not unique to me, but that's a little sad, because you put so much time into these stories, and they come from for me, a pretty personal place. So I don't really care so much if people don't like what I write, but it's sad to go on and someone's like, nope, you suck.
Thumbs down.
Right.
I mean, I edit, produced, host 3 podcasts at this point. And so far that has not happened. I haven't gotten any random, like, you suck.
Good.
sort of things.
That's good.
But I'm just, it'll happen eventually. And I think it's just the nature, if you put content out there, there's just some folks who are going to, regardless of what it is, just not like it.
Sure. And I think when you reach a certain level of your work being exposed to people, and I guess it's kind of a good sign, right? Like enough people know about you that someone doesn't like you, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I try to think of it that way.
That's a good point.
It's like, you might not like me, but at least you know me, right?
Yeah, you're taking the time to engage with the product still,
right?
Even if it's a negative review,
right?
But to your point about more diverse creators in this field, I think it's fantastic that, because I'm just a regular white guy, and it's nice to see so much content come out, particularly in the last year or so. I mean, there's not only content from female creators in the pen and paper world, but even like all the different stuff that pops up around this particular hobby. There's pin creators, like we know a pin creator named Paula Harris, who's fantastic, and the actual play podcast, The Broadswords, if you're familiar with them. It's an all-female cast. It's an amazing podcast. I actually started this podcast around the same time as them in an actual play format, and saw them take off. And I was sitting here with like 2-3 downloads.
Yeah.
I got a little jealous, but then I realized, well, holy shit, their stuff is so much more meaningful to so many more people because it's not just some white guys playing D&D. So I mean, it's fantastic to watch them be able to grow. And as I've revamped this podcast into what it is now, the last couple of months, this format fits much better, I think, with what people who are in this field, this hobby want. Because the feedback has been astounding the last 2 months for this podcast, which has led me to be able to meet cool people like you. And so it's really nice that you can, if you can find your niche in this hobby, then people will really respond to it.
Absolutely. I think and whatever type of art form, whether that's a podcast or the type of artist you are or the type of writer you are, I think having something that is special to you, that you feel is like highlights your strength, I think is great, because there's a lot of creators in the community, but I never feel like I really have to actively compete against other people.
That's really
I don't really view other creators as competition. It's just that like a rising tide lifts all boats. So the more we can put out into the world together and collaborate and find the things that we can excel at, I think is better for everyone.
Absolutely. And like, I mean, the people over at D&D just said that this was the most, they said it was the most successful year, which means it's been the most profitable year for them ever in the entire history of the game. And it's because of, I love the product. Obviously, it's amazing. I own every 5th edition thing. I'm a collector, all that stuff going back to the 70s. But I think it's because the community around it has built it up as much as it has. And it's people like you who are developing additional modules for it that appeal to different people, and people creating additional content for the game, like actual play podcasts and stuff like that. It's just made it open to everybody. Because when I was growing up, I mean, I'm not even that old, I'm 29, but when I was in middle school and high school playing 3.5, it was still like you were ostracized if you did it. That was like the nerd thing that nobody would ever go to because you're just a weirdo if you play it.
Sure.
And I mean, even going back to the 80s with the Satanic Panic, with the D&D stuff, it's always been this closeted thing that you only do in your basement. And to see it become what it is today is just, it makes me so happy.
Yeah, we're like the cool kids now, right, guys?
Yeah, we're very cool.
Yeah, so cool.
Because we have a podcast and we write stuff and we play D&D.
Right.
I mean, hell, we actually have a bar, or we have a pub here in town that you can go.
Yep, the Glass
play.
Die.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. Owner's Jeff. He's amazing. It's a great place. Voted actually best nerd hangout.
Yes.
And for the year. It is awesome. Very happy to see that succeed.
My D&D party's portrait is hung up at the Glass Die. Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the Tavern Burners, as we call ourselves. Okay. At least that's our original lineup. But yeah, we're on the wall there.
I don't get up there nearly as often as I should. But I need to definitely get out there more. So one thing that I think is really cool about this in particular is that how everybody got into it is so different. So I kind of like to ask the folks who come onto the show, like, how did you get into this game?
So I've only been playing D&D since 2016.
Okay.
So I do not have an extensive history in this game. I wanted to play when I was a child. I've always been into fantasy and science fiction. And when I was little, or at least younger, I used to look at the books at the library, and I knew that someday I wanted to play D&D. So it was always on my radar.
Yeah.
And then I read lots of fantasy literature, and I was a writer, and I was in theater in high school, so I've always been kind of adjacent to things that I think lend themselves well to D&D, but I didn't have an opportunity to play. I think part of it is my gender, that no one really ever sought to offer an opportunity to me. In retrospect, I wish I would have just taken the initiative, but when you don't really have an example of how it works, it's kind of hard to get started. It's a little daunting.
Oh yeah.
Because I would look at the rule books and I'm like, I understand the story, but I don't know how to really facilitate a game. Yeah. Because now you can see like an actual play live stream and you kind of know like, okay, this is what a game looks like. But when that wasn't around, I had no examples. I'd never seen anyone ever play D&D.
Yeah.
I just knew about it because I was into fantasy and I knew that I would probably really like it. And I also really loved fantasy role play as a concept. I always wanted to be into LARPing and like that was like a dream of mine.
That's the next goal.
Oh my gosh.
We actually have a LARPers guild here in town. They meet over at Rancho San Rafael.
Oh, yes. I met some of them at RageCon. Yes.
Oh, no kidding. They were there.
Yes. There were so many awesome people at RageCon, but there were a few people, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but they were involved with the local LARPing effort. So that is definitely on my agenda. But I've wanted to do these things for years. I'm also 29. So I've had kind of a lifelong goal to just be part of these communities. And I knew that eventually I'd probably get the chance to try it, but it was never something that I had a chance to really try until a couple years ago when a bunch of my other close friends were like, we also want to play D&D. And then John, who's a member here at the Reno Collective where we're recording, he is like, well, I've been a DM for like a long time. He's been a DM for like 30 something years. And he's like a pro. And we're like, oh my gosh, would you DM a game for us? And he's like, yeah. And then it was all of us who had wanted to play D&D for years. So finally we just got together and started. And then it immediately consumed my life and existence.
Oh, clearly.
Yeah. Like, oh my gosh. Now it's like, I'm like, who even was I before D&D? Because I knew that I would love it. I knew before we started that I would love it just because I love any opportunity to just engage with a fantasy world. I love RPG video games like Skyrim and Oblivion and I just gravitate toward that already. So this was kind of like my new outlet for that. So yeah, I've only really been playing since 2016. So I'm a total poser.
That's that does bring up a good point though with this community. It's probably one of the most accepting communities for the most part. Stay away from Twitter if you're looking for acceptance. But it is like it's just friendly people playing a game. And I think things like RageCon and the feedback that you're getting and I mean the broadswords and PodCon. Like are you aware of PodCon?
Yes.
So PodCon is it's supposed to be I guess it's going to be an annual podcast festival up in Seattle now. It's set up by the people who did Welcome to Night Vale and two of the three McElroy brothers and Hank Green and a ton of other folks. But it is, if you look at the panels and the guest speakers and all that stuff, it's mostly D&D related people.
Sure.
For this next year.
I believe it.
Which is really cool. So, I mean, and it's all people, like you said, everybody just kind of lifting it up and lifting each other up. And so, I mean, even if this is your first time playing, you know, if you find the right people to play with, it's going to be okay. Like they're going to teach you how to do it. And I think that's one of the coolest, it's been one of the coolest things about getting back into this that I've found. Yeah,
I agree. I never feel like anyone holds it against me that I've only been playing for a couple years.
Yeah.
I also feel like once I started, I took it really seriously. And so I really made it a point to learn as much as I could about it. And then we played through a few campaigns. We played through Curse of Strahd. We played through another homebrewed campaign. So I felt like we were playing regularly enough that I feel like I was really gaining a lot of knowledge about it, enough to take the leap to start writing, which for me, it was kind of an inevitability anyway.
Yeah.
After we finished Curse of Strahd, I was like, wow, I love this game so much and I already enjoy creative writing. Why don't I just try writing a one-shot? And we had just played another one-shot by a community member named, the one-shot's called The Wolves of Welton, which is a pretty popular one-shot. It's a super simple story, but it's easy to run for both new DMs and players. And so I was just kind of looking at their module and I was like, I think I could probably do this. So I was kind of using that as an example. And then I just kind of went from there. But I did have to really study the rule book and I studied the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I'm always studying those books, but I don't feel like anyone really like makes it a point that I'm just like some total noob and I'm like, who am I to think that I can write this stuff? But I feel like there's definitely gatekeeping in the community, but I feel like that's changed a lot. Like there's definitely people who are a little bit resistant to all these new people.
Definitely.
And I know that there's another all-female podcast called Girls Guts Glory, which is awesome. It's on YouTube. Everyone should check it out because it's their first season. The episodes are only like really a few minutes long because they've like edited them down, but they're hilarious. It's so good.
I'll check
but
it out.
I know that they got a lot of flack because they're all conventionally attractive women who are actresses and they live in LA, and people were saying like, I can't believe there's all these like attractive people who play D&D now, and who are these people? Are these people like someone's wives and girlfriends and whatnot?
Oh,
and that was a fairly recent comment, and I think it kind of took off on Twitter, and they're like, first of all, like just because we're conventionally attractive as grown women doesn't mean that was always our experience as kids. Like, you don't know what our background is. Like, you don't know about our history. And also, like, that's not really a great way to judge people in the community. Like, I think that there's a lot of people who've been playing D&D for decades who were ostracized and who people didn't understand the hobby. And I understand how that can kind of affect your outlook on all these new people who are now cool and like people who are making lots of money on D&D shows. Right. And I can see how that could be a little frustrating because you're like, that wasn't my experience in all the years that I've played. But I think that for the most part, I think people are pretty accepting of new players and new writers, especially. Like I personally, I mean, I can't speak for all writers, but I personally feel like my experience has been pretty good, even though I'm usually in groups that are fairly male dominated. But I don't usually feel like I'm treated differently because I'm a woman. Sometimes I actually feel like my work is treated is judged more harshly because I'm like I more live up to, and I know that that's an experience of lots of marginalized people. So I'm not just like I'm a white woman. I know I'm fully aware of my privilege with this. So, but I just know that like I can kind of tell when people are giving my work almost like more scrutiny than they would, because I feel, and I do feel like I always have more to prove, especially now that I'm a guild adept. Like, oh my gosh, people I feel like are totally scrutinizing my work way harder, which is fair because I'm essentially representing Wizards of the Coast in an adjacent way. Like I'm part of a group that they've picked, so I feel like I do kind of have to like live up to that expectations. Plus I'm alongside these other amazing prolific creators. Like I still don't quite understand how I got like involved in this, like why they like picked me out of this, but I mean I'm grateful for it, but I do feel like total imposter syndrome sometimes. But I feel like for the most part people are really accepting. I think they realize that the more diversity in this industry, in this hobby, is beneficial for everyone. The more points of view we can have, the better stories we get. Like I think that better stories are told when more people can tell them. So I feel like for the most part it's pretty positive, but there's still some shadowy corners for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Twitter can be gnarly. I feel like I actually preferred Twitter to Facebook. Something about Facebook still,
me too.
It feels really personal. So I feel like I have a lot of people now who friend requests me, and I know that always kind of makes me nervous. As a woman, I've had a lot of negative experiences on the internet, as you can probably imagine. And now that I feel like I'm writing for such a public audience, like I do kind of always have a little bit of a lingering fear that like something's going to kind of like come back to bite me in the ass, or like or someone like some person who has kind of a negative reputation in the community was sending me some weird cryptic messages fairly recently. And I'm just like, it makes me nervous being in the public eye in any sort of capacity. Like I'm so small fry, like I'm not like claiming that like I have this massive readership, but I feel like I've definitely like, I worry that sometimes being out in the public on the internet, like exposes me to all the creepy people on the internet.
Yeah. And I didn't take anything like that seriously. I'm a pretty trusting guy when it comes to most people. So like I'm 9 times out of 10 not going to like, if you ask like, hey, can you want to collaborate on this thing? I'm not going to like research who you are to make sure I'm not hitching a ride with somebody who's a monster.
Sure.
But I actually just had an experience recently, and I won't name names, but there was a web comic. The creator reached out to me and he's like, I'm starting this other thing and check my stuff out. And it'd be really great if we could collaborate on a bunch of stuff and I can come on your podcast and all that stuff. And I just had a weird feeling. And I started digging through some of the person's YouTube stuff, and I found a whole, it went on for way too long. It had to be at least 30 minutes of him ranting about like women in comic books and how, everybody is pandering to what he kept calling the minority folks.
Oh,
and
great.
saying, just awful stuff about, women who were in leadership positions in comic books being like, sleeping their way to the top and all this horrible stuff. And I, immediately, like we didn't do anything.
Right.
We didn't work together, but I mean, like I immediately just like, I'm not going to work with you, man. Sorry.
Yeah. And, totally.
And of course, he had tied it all back to oh, the reason I'm not successful is because everyone else is getting an advantage because I'm a white guy and, everybody else who's not white or straight or whatever is just, they're just getting artificial advantages. And it was just a nightmare. So now I'm going to I'm going to research a little more.
Yeah.
So I hope not to, and that's what I mean by Twitter is not, for me, it's been fantastic. But
Sure.
For some of the folks who have reached out to me, it's been a little creepy. And I've seen a lot of people get attacked. I mean, like there's people who have completely pulled out of Twitter because they've been attacked for stuff. But again, that is not everybody's experience, thankfully.
Sure.
But,
yeah. Too many people's experience though.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which is terrible.
Yeah.
I think you do kind of have to step back sometimes and just distance yourself from social media. Like there's definitely, there's been weeks where I'm just like this, there's too much, even sometimes getting like positive feedback, just people like engaging with you all the time sometimes gets a little bit exhausting, or when they're expecting, quick responses, or, like my email inbox is basically an abyss at this point. So, but I feel like sometimes when people, especially when you start to do, public like commissioned work and whatnot, like I feel like there's just like weird expectations of like how you're using your time, and like never, not with people that I've worked with. All the people that I've worked with have been amazing, but I do feel like there's just in my past, like there's always been like these kind of like weird expectations, like, oh, like why are you on Twitter when you should be working on my project? Like people get weirdly demanding at some point when you are kind of in a public space like that. So I think it's good when you're any kind of creator to take time to just detox from the internet for a while.
Yeah, same.
And also just so you don't get discouraged by what other people are doing or other people's success. Like I'm not someone who, like, I'm not a jealous person at all, and I'm not really affected by other people being successful, but at some point, sometimes when you see all of that, you do kind of start to subtly compare yourself and where you're at with people. And you just kind of have to remind yourself that like your journey is unique to you, and you will find success where you're meant to find success. But sometimes I feel like, especially as a writer, when you have friends who are getting book deals, or, just like when you feel like people are meeting these milestones, it's not so much that you're like, that I ever feel like negative or specifically jealous. It's just like you feel like you always have to be kind of working at this fast pace to meet these arbitrary milestones. So I think that sometimes just getting off the internet for a while and just refocusing on like why you're a creator in the first place. Like, why do you like to do your podcast? Why do you like to write modules? Like, why do you like to play D&D with people? Like, I think that since people are finding so much success in this industry, it's almost kind of changed the way a lot of people are approaching games. Like, I feel like even on our group, like we talk a lot about like, how can we do like a live play or an actual play show? Like, how can we, not so much like how can we monetize it, but like how can we do something for the public? But we're like, do we need to be doing something for the public? Like, can't this game just be ours? Like, does every D&D project need to lead to something greater, or can it just like remain a fun, game? So
exactly. Yeah. And that was something I struggled with when I deleted the actual play stuff on this feed, when I reformatted this whole show, is because I had a lot of content out there, and yeah, I mean, retrospectively, I personally don't feel it was the greatest, but it's like, oh well, all this work I put in, I'm just gonna delete it, and people are gonna like miss out on stuff, but you're honestly not missing out on anything. but it does, like, I do always feel the urge to like, well, I got to record this thing because it's gonna get lost to time.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said of just having a personal experience with your friends, and all the stuff that I DM for now. It's just that, and it's been really successful for me anyway. I mean, it's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun.
That's good. Yeah, I think that it's exciting to see what's possible in this industry, but it's also nice to realize that this is a game that is best when you just can share it with people that you care about, and to always kind of come back to that.
It's very cool. So I always. I'm interested in writing, or for folks who write and create like you do. You had said you read, you grew up reading fantasy literature, playing video games with that tilt, things like that. So are these stories that you like think about and create, or do you feel like you're inspired by something ever, and then you just like go off and create your own thing based off of that little bit of inspiration from it? So like how do you create what you create?
So when I first started writing one-shots, it was mostly just ideas that I had just come up on my own. A lot of it was inspired by travel. So
Nice.
I was on a trip to Italy with my family last year, a trip that we'd been planning for a long time. So I'd been doing lots of research about Italy. My mom's Italian. So when I was in Italy, I really wanted to play a one-shot that was Italian inspired because that's what part of my heritage is. And I thought it would be really fun to have a story that was set in an Italian inspired place. And then that kind of started to formulate into this bigger kind of concept of these different areas in Europe that I've traveled to and been inspired by. So my first stories were kind of set in this kind of fictional place that I had just kind of come up with on my own. That was kind of this angels and demons concept. And that was inspired by different places in Italy and also Eastern Europe, which is where I got married in Prague. And the other side of my heritage is Eastern European and Russian. So I thought it would be fun to have this kind of ongoing campaign of the tension between these two sides that kind of mirrors the actual history of Europe, like the Holy Roman Empire,
Very
like
cool.
East versus West and stuff like that. So a lot of my stories are directly inspired by travel and the cities that I've visited that I've loved. And more recently, though, I've been really trying to study the lore of the Forgotten Realms that already exists because I'm like, I don't really need to be reinventing the wheel if there's already cities that are in places and locations that are inspired already by the places that I'm writing about. Like there's like a place in the Forgotten Realms that's called Damara, and it's very much kind of like Russian, Eastern European inspired. So I'm like, instead of like creating all these original cities in a locale like that, I can maybe just tie this in more closely with the Forgotten Realms. And technically for Dungeon Masters Guild, work needs to be set in the Forgotten Realms or in some of their approved campaigns. Like you can write Ravenloft content.
Okay.
Or you can write like non-specific settings that can be kind of placed into anywhere, but you're technically not supposed to be creating your own campaign settings that are very specific. If you want to do that, you can publish your work on Drive-Thru RPG instead and have more like setting, like create like a whole campaign setting. So what I've been doing is, because all the stories I've been writing are in these kind of fictional cities that I've just kind of created out of my head. So I've been really trying to tie this all back into the Forgotten Realms. And just by studying the lore that has already existed in the D&D world, like there's so many like myths and legends and places that inspire new stories for me. So it's kind of been an evolving process. And there's still a lot of stories that I want to tell that are not necessarily inspired by anything directly D&D related, but I also just love like looking through the monster manual and finding cool creatures that I can kind of build a story around. Like with my ongoing Angels and Demons campaign, like a lot of that was inspired by the cool celestials in the monster manual, and then Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes came out with all the cool demons and devils, and I was like, this is perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily pull stuff from scratch, but a lot of it's just based off of my own experiences and the locations that I think should be more representative in fantasy literature. Like I love a good like classic fantasy style that's very like England or, you know, like that kind of setting, that more traditional medieval setting. But I like it even more when I can kind of use that in places that haven't been as portrayed in fantasy literature, like places like Istanbul or St. Petersburg, Russia, or like those cool.
Yeah, that would be very cool.
Yeah, so that's just what I'm drawn to. I like to also use fairly traditional tropes. Like my very first story is a masquerade, which is hardly an original idea. But I basically this came about because I told my DM, I was like, okay, John, I just want to play a story where we get all dressed up and go to a fancy party and just like have fun. I just want to do that because we just finished Curse of Strahd, and it was, you know, that's a hard and intense story, and I loved it. It like kind of changed my life. But I was like ready. I was like, I just want to do something fun. So I was like, well, I'll just write a masquerade because that's such a fun idea. Plus, that story was kind of formulated when I was in Venice, which has masks everywhere, and it's hard not to be excited and inspired by all these cool animal masks. So that's kind of how that story came up. And then ever since then, a lot of my stories kind of start with this kind of a trope, like or traditional idea. Another one of my stories was about a labyrinth, which again, not an original idea. A maze is not like an original idea. And then I just kind of build stories that kind of retell traditional stories. But I think that's what's kind of fun about D&D is that people kind of expect to see those familiar tropes told in new ways, and there's so many ways you can do that. Like you can tell a masquerade story in 100 different ways. You can set it in a different locale. You can set it in the Feywild. You can set it in Barovia. You can set it in Chult. And every one of those places will be the masquerade will be totally different. So I think there's something really fun and exciting about taking something that is kind of maybe overdone or overplayed and kind of make it your own. And I actually recommend that a lot to new writers who are like, I really want to write something, but I want to be really original. And I think you can be original in just more like how you tell it and the kinds of characters that you incorporate rather than trying to write this really complex, complicated story. So yeah, I'm inspired by tropes. I'm inspired lately by the Forgotten Realms and all the lore that currently exists.
There's so much there.
There's so much. It's crazy. And some of it's hard to find a lot of it. So I've been reading just through Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, just basically scouring wikis. I've been downloading lots of content, just like older modules and content just to read through that. Before the Eberron announcement, I had downloaded the original Eberron rulebook and campaign guide and things like that just to kind of familiarize myself because like I don't have a long history in D&D, so I haven't played a lot of these locales. And even when we started in my party, we played the Lost Mines module, but it was kind of adapted. Our DM kind of had changed some things and kind of homebrewed stuff, so I didn't necessarily have a lot of knowledge about like what the Forgotten Realms like really was or like what happened in it. I had a little bit of experience playing Neverwinter Nights when I was in high school. So I knew a little bit about like Neverwinter and things like that. And then just like Baldur's Gate and like those kinds of famous locations.
Of course, yeah, I think that was like, and if any fan of role-playing games has probably gone through Baldur's Gate a couple of times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm just kind of now getting caught up with all this lore. And that's led to a bunch of new ideas that I have kind of in the pipeline. But yeah, originally it was I just had ideas that I knew that I could tell with the D&D mechanics, and I could incorporate the creatures that already existed. Like I usually don't do original creature design. I usually could just kind of stick with what's already created there. I'm not great at creating things that are balanced. So like I get like kind of daunted by having to write balanced mechanics. So I usually focus on creating like just going all in with like the narrative and the atmosphere, and then just really taking advantage of the existing mechanics and stats that I don't have to create myself.
Because there's thousands and thousands and thousands of stat blocks you can choose from.
Yeah, right. I'm like, why create my own creature? I finally created a version of my own creature for my first solo adventure because I wasn't quite finding something that really fit. Mm-hmm. And plus, when it's a solo adventure, when you only have one player, you really need to make sure that the enemy that they're fighting is balanced.
It doesn't just eat the character.
Right. Yeah. And it still ended up being it's still a tough final battle, but I needed to kind of adapt something to make it a little bit more balanced. So that was kind of my first foray into trying to create my own creature.
Yeah.
I think it's worked out pretty well, but it was hard because there's so many things to consider. There's the challenge rating, and how do you like properly adjust their AC, and how does that affect their other stats? And it's just, I don't know. I get
seems like
stressed
math
out.
when I get nervous. Yeah.
It totally is. Yeah.
And that's something that, quite frankly, I was hoping you would say, because it gives, I think that something like that gives a lot of, or should give a lot of reinforcement to people who are currently working on their stuff right now, to know that you can just have your own ideas and just put it out there.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be this giant complex thing. Like I literally have, over the last 5 years, built a multiverse. Like I've got weird time travel elements in my stuff, and characters pop up in other places, and I have this whole thing on my computer, a timeline of this world that I built. And I mean, if I had thought 5 years ago, like, well, I could probably just like stick this in the Feywilds or something, it would have saved me a lot of time.
I think it's good to always be ambitious like that. And I think there's definitely I'm trying to really encourage myself to do more like ambitious world building. But I think when you're getting started, it's okay to just think small.
Yeah.
Because it's not small when a DM is running your module. It's just, it seems small to you because you have all these crazy, awesome ideas that you have the big picture in your head. Mm-hmm. But when someone's playing your module, they don't see all that. So they just see what you give them. And I think for new writers, it's okay to just do a little piece at a time. And what I think is a good way to do it is to just plan on writing a lot of content in your story, in your world, in your multiverse, but just tackling it one story at a time and just making them self-contained one-shots, because then you can really build upon that. but you're still completing one kind of shorter story at a time.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's fun to still be planning out a long story, but to write like a full setting, to write a full campaign, especially when you've not necessarily shared things publicly with people like outside of your gaming table, like it's daunting, and there's a lot of considerations there.
Yeah.
And in July, I ran a month-long RPG writer workshop. And we had...
Yeah, I was very, very sad that I missed that.
It's okay. It's coming up again in November.
Perfect.
So, yeah. But it was really cool to just see all these amazing, crazy, awesome, big world-building ideas that a lot of the creators in the group had. And a lot of these people were brand new writers. A lot of them had DM'd games where they had been using these ideas and stories, which is great because then they've actually kind of been actively playtesting them. But they were just like, I have all these ideas, but I don't know like where to get started. But I'm like, well, you got to do a small piece at a time. Start small and then allude to something bigger. Because once you have something finished and complete and out into the world, I think that's really motivating to continue going. But I think I just know that I feel daunted when I have too big of a project to tackle at once.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely think that new writers should take advantage of all the resources that are available to them. Use existing monsters, use existing places. You don't need to reinvent the wheel to write a really awesome original story. And that's actually what DM's Guild is for. They want you to be using the resources that they've already created and published to inspire you to write your own stories. And that doesn't mean that there's not a lot left there to tell. Like even in like Curse of Straw, there's so many amazing stories that you could tell that are set in that world and that campaign. Like any one of those NPCs that you encounter could lead to their own crazy awesome storyline.
All of that stuff, just depending upon how you play, can spiral off into universes unknown, which I think is one of the cool things. Like video games, even as free form of something like Skyrim, they've never quite given the same satisfaction to me as like a tabletop role playing.
Yes.
Because you could literally just do whatever you want.
Absolutely.
And that's very cool. So what's next for you, if you're allowed to say?
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm already booked until next summer. Like I'm already thinking a year ahead, which is a little wild. So, okay, where do I start? So I'm just trying to think of what's actually been announced because I am under NDA for something. So can't actually say everything that's on the agenda. Lots of cool stuff though. So I'm working on an Eberron one-shot. That's part of the official Adventurers League Eberron path. Yeah. So that starts September 21st. And us Guild Adepts are releasing one-shot every week after that for 10 weeks. So I believe mine will be out sometime in October.
Nice.
So I'm really excited to be writing content for Eberron. And I have the 4th installment of my ongoing Angels and Demons series coming out also in October. It ties pretty closely to Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, so it has lots of good demon and devil stuff. Nice. So it's a good Halloween module. Okay. Yeah, and it's also my birthday's in October too, so it's mostly for me just to write something that has all these cool creatures that I like. Yeah. I mean, again, I write selfishly. Things are usually stories that I think are cool. And then I have the 2nd installment of my solo adventure trilogy out, I believe, in September. And oh my gosh.
And this is the sequel to The Executioner's Daughter.
Correct. Yes. Which and you so much for featuring that review and summary last episode.
It was really funny too because Patrick Higginbotham, he's a board game blogger, huge fan. He runs Non-Zero Sum Games on Instagram and at nonzerosumgames.com. And he we've been chatting for a while, and he pitched me the idea of helping out on the podcast, and I pitched the idea of his non-zero summary segment that he did on the last episode of this podcast. And he's like, I've been a huge fan of this author. She's great. She just released this thing called The Executioner's Daughter, and it's a solo adventure for D&D, which I've never seen before. And I said, holy shit, I actually know her. And so obviously, I would love to have it on this. I told him I'd love to have it on the show, and he wrote up a thing, and I tacked it onto the episode, and a ton of people have been talking to Patrick about it. So I think it got some traction, and the episode's been downloaded almost 1,000 times.
Oh my gosh.
So
congrats. That's so awesome.
And then, on top of the fact that Patrick has blasted it all over his social media stuff, and he's got contacts with thousands and thousands of people. So,
sure.
And there are a ton of folks who are really interested in a one-shot for a solo play. which is, I'd never even thought of that concept before, but it seems really fun.
I mean, I hope it's fun. People seem to have really enjoyed it. And Patrick has been just so amazing and so supportive of that story and some of my other work as well. And he was actually one of the first people who reached out to me about The Executioner's Daughter.
Awesome.
Because I almost didn't even publish it because I was like, this is a story that I don't think anyone is going to like. And I had never really written a solo adventure, but I had already written a short story of what eventually became the solo adventure. Like, it was a story that I'd already written. And my plan was to just have almost like a 1-page dungeon, but like a really short, like little solo adventure that people could just download for free when they sign up for my newsletter on my website. Like, that was my plan initially. That's always how my plans always start out really small, and then they immediately become like stupidly big. So then I was like, well, there might be potential here. And there's another creator who does some really awesome solo adventures on Dungeon Masters Guild, by the way. So just if you type in solo in the search bar, you'll find some other options. But so I was aware of the concept, and I also have really enjoyed choose your own adventure books as a kid. So I was like, well, why can't you just do this for D&D? Like, that's kind of this would be perfect for that. And I just thought that story specifically really worked well for a solo adventure because there's not a lot of interaction for like a party, but I thought it would be an interesting journey for one person to travel along. But then toward the end of when I was writing it, I was like, I don't know. This is feeling weird. Like, I don't know if anyone's going to like this. I don't know if this is like how you write a solo adventure, because I looked at the other solo adventures on DM's Guild, which I think only one other author has done. And so the only other options on there are by this other author, and they're awesome, but they're like thick, long books. They're like hundreds of pages and they have like so many options. And I was just like, this little dinky story, I think mine's like 30 pages or whatever. I was like, I don't know. If I'm not doing any of this right, which is basically how I feel anytime I write anything D related. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just gonna guess and do my best. And then that has by far been my most successful story, which has totally blown my mind because it was the one that I almost didn't put out into the world.
Well,
and
congrats.
Well, thank you.
That's awesome.
Which is exciting and somewhat validating, just because it wasn't that I doubted that the idea was interesting. I just didn't know if I was doing it in a way that would be appealing to anyone. I didn't know if anyone wanted a solo adventure, like if that was something that anyone would want to play. That is definitely not the case. People are now like kind of clamoring for solo adventures. So if you're thinking about writing content, you and everyone else who's listening to this, consider writing a solo adventure. It's really challenging because you have to really think of all the potential paths that one person can take, but you don't have to write every single option. You just have to give them enough to really make an engaging story. And I just thought that there was something appealing about like sitting down with a short story and getting, a nice cup of coffee or something to drink and just like enjoying just reading and playing through something by yourself. Like, there was something that seemed really appealing and peaceful to me about that. Also, I wrote this when I was like crazy busy, so I was just thinking like just daydreaming about how nice that sounded to do that.
What it would be like if you could just have a moment of peace.
Yeah, how nice. So that's kind of where it came from. But yeah, I've never felt such doubt over a project before, and then I've never gotten such a great response. And it's interesting to me how those were kind of bookended for that specific project. So it makes me nervous, because I'm like, wow, I'm setting the expectations a little too high for my next one. But yeah, so he's been just so amazing and supportive, and I've gotten a lot of really great feedback on that story. So I have a follow-up to that story. It's not a direct sequel, but it's part of this trilogy where there's some kind of related themes and ideas and stuff there, but they're not all, you don't have to read or play through all of them to understand the story. So I'm excited about that. And what else do I have? Eventually, so after the 4th installment of my Angels and Demons campaign, which is called A Requiem of Wings, after that's released, I'm working on putting together an actual campaign book for all that, because there's a lot of other stories and adventures set in that world. Actually, the solo adventures are kind of loosely tied into all that, but very distantly. So I'm kind of considering putting that all into the same campaign book. So, but that probably won't be out until sometime next year, because there's a lot that goes into that. And lots of awesome collaborations that I got to work on this year. One with Phil Beckwith Publishing, PB Publishing. Okay. He wrote a really cool module called Struggle in Three-Horn Valley, which is kind of a Cholt's like Tomb of Annihilation-esque adventure set in this cool jungle island. And he commissioned me to write the sequel, which was nerve-wracking because his first module was really successful. Yeah. So now I'm like, oh God, like no pressure. So that should be out, I think, within a month or two. And that was really cool. I really pushed myself to write an adventure that was really outside of my comfort zone. And I learned just a lot just from that experience. So that should be out sometime soon. And I'm working on another really cool collaboration with Poison Potion Press, who produce Shore of Dreams, which if you haven't seen that on DM's Guild, you have to go check it out. It's such an incredible, it's one of the best modules on DM's Guild, like hands down.
On. Yeah, I'll have to go check that out.
The story is great. The art is gorgeous. It's just, he's an amazing creator, and he worked with another prolific writer called JVC Perry, Josh Perry, who's super prolific, writes a lot of awesome content on DM's Guild. But just those two, working with those two kind of masterminds, creative geniuses, was cool and intimidating. But that should be out later this year. I don't actually know the exact date on that, and I'm not supposed to say a whole lot about it, but I think I can. Cool. It's public that I'm working on it, so I think that's fair game. I don't know. There's too many things to name.
Well, it sounds like you're busy.
I am,
which is awesome, and it's really cool to. I mean, you're clearly passionate about all of this, and it's cool that you're able to invest those passions into something that will, help you continue to work in this field, this for the long run, hopefully, because you put out really good content.
Thank you so much. It's been an exciting learning opportunity. I'm just along for the ride wherever it leads, trying to be realistic about, the future. But I hope to be doing this for a while. And I'm just grateful that people have kind of taken a chance on me and given me opportunities to write for larger audiences.
Yeah. I mean, the gaming industry is ballooned exponentially the last decade or so. And I think it's got a spot for everybody. So it's really cool to see so many people involved.
For sure.
Right on. Well, thank you so much. Where can folks find, besides DM's Guild, where can folks find out more about you?
Sure. So you can visit my website, which is ashleywarrenwrites.com. I'm on Twitter, Ashley NH Warren. And I have a Facebook page, Ashley Warren Writes. I think those are the best places. Instagram, Ashley Warren Writes. I mean, if you just look that up, you'll probably find all my stuff. But you can find links to all those things on my website. And the RPG Writer Workshop returns in November. And if anyone's interested in that, you can sign up on my website just to be on the list for when that goes live.
Very cool. I'm going to go do that this afternoon, I guess.
Yay.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Cool.
Very cool. Well, thank you again. And maybe we'll have you back on later.
That would be
when more
awesome.
stuff comes out.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.